Hello there, my old friend. Tonight, our quest takes us through a collection of old fairy tales written down by Hans Christian Andersen. Now, settle in, take a deep breath, and let's travel back to an age of myth and legend. The Story of the Wind. Near the shores of the Great Belt, which is one of the straits that connect the Kattegat with the Baltic, stands an old mansion with thick red walls. I know every stone of it, says the wind. I saw it when it was part of the castle of Mark Stig on the promontory. But the castle was obliged to be pulled down, and the stone was used again for the walls of a new mansion on another spot, the baronial residence of Borreby, which still stands near the coast. I knew them well, those noble lords and ladies, the successive generations that dwelt there. And now I'm going to tell you of Waldemar Daa and his daughters. How proud was his bearing, for he was of royal blood, and could boast of more noble deeds than merely hunting the stag and emptying the wine cup. His rule was despotic. It shall be, he was accustomed to say. His wife, in garments embroidered with gold, stepped proudly over the polished marble floors. The tapestries were gorgeous, and the furniture of costly and artistic taste. She had brought gold and plate with her into the house. The cellars were full of wine. Black, fiery horses neighed in the stables. There was a look of wealth about the house of Borreby at that time. They had 3 children, daughters, fair and delicate maidens, Ida, Joanna, and Anna Dorothea. I have never forgotten their names. They were a rich, noble family, born in affluence and nurtured in luxury. Whirr, whirr, roared the wind, and went on. I did not see in this house, as in other great houses, the high-born lady sitting among her women, turning the spinning wheel. She could sweep the sounding chords of the guitar and sing to the music, not always Danish melodies, but the songs of a strange land. It was live and let live here. Stranger guests came from far and near. Music sounded, goblets clashed, and I, said the wind, was not able to drown the noise. Ostentation, pride, splendor, and display ruled, but not the fear of the Lord. It was on the evening of the first day of May, the wind continued. I came from the west, and had seen the ships overpowered with the waves, when all on board persisted, or were cast shipwrecked on the coast of Jutland. I had hurried across the heath and over Jutland's wood-girt eastern coast, and over the island of Funen, and then I drove across the Great Belt, sighing and moaning. At length I lay down to rest on the shores of Zealand, near to the great house of Borreby, where the splendid forest of oaks still flourished. The young men of the neighborhood were collecting branches and brushwood under the oak trees. The largest and driest they could find, they carried into the village and piled them up in a heap and set them on fire. Then the men and maidens danced and sung in a circle round the blazing pile. I lay quite quiet, said the wind, but I silently touched a branch which had been brought by one of the handsomest of the young men, and the wood blazed up brightly, blazed brighter than all the rest. Then he was chosen as the chief, and received the name of the shepherd, and might choose his lamb from among the maidens. There was greater mirth and rejoicing than I had ever heard in the halls of the rich baronial house. Then the noble lady drove by towards the baron's mansion with her 3 daughters, in a gilded carriage drawn by 6 horses. The daughters were young and beautiful, 3 charming blossoms, a rose, a lily, and a white hyacinth. The mother was a proud tulip, and never acknowledged the salutations of any of the men or maidens who paused in their sport to do her honour. The gracious lady seemed like a flower that was rather stiff in the stalk. Rose, lily, and hyacinth. Yes, I saw them all 3. Whose little lambs will they one day become, thought I. Their shepherd will be a gallant knight, perhaps a prince. The carriage rolled on, and the peasants resumed their dancing. They drove about the summer through all the villages near. But one night, when I rose again, the high-born lady laid down to rise again no more. That thing came to her which comes to us all, in which there is nothing new. Waldemar Daa remained for a time silent and thoughtful. The loftiest tree may be bowed without being broken, said a voice within him. His daughters wept. All the people in the mansion wiped their eyes. But Lady Daa had driven away, and I drove away too, said the wind. Whirr, whirr. I returned again. I often returned and passed over the island of Funen and the shores of the Belt. Then I rested by Borreby, near the glorious wood, where the heron made his nest, the haunt of the wood pigeons, the bluebirds, and the black stork. It was yet spring. Some were sitting on their eggs. Others had already hatched their young broods. But how they fluttered about and cried out when the axe sounded through the forest, blow upon blow. The trees of the forest were doomed. Waldemar Daa wanted to build a noble ship, a man of war, a 3-decker, which the king would be sure to buy. And these, the trees of the wood, the landmark of the seamen, the refuge of the birds, must be felled. The hawk started up and flew away, for its nest was destroyed. The heron and all the birds of the forest became homeless and flew about in fear and anger. I could well understand how they felt. Crows and ravens croaked, as if in scorn, while the trees were cracking and falling around them. Far in the interior of the wood, where a noisy swarm of labourers were working, stood Waldemar Daa and his 3 daughters, and all were laughing at the wild cries of the birds, excepting one, the youngest, Anna Dorothea, who felt grieved to the heart, and when they made preparations to fell a tree that was almost dead, and on whose naked branches the black stork had built her nest, she saw the poor little things stretching out their necks, and she begged for mercy for them with the tears in her eyes. So the tree with the black stork's nest was left standing. The tree itself, however, was not worth much to speak of. Then there was a great deal of hewing and sawing, and at last the 3-decker was built. The builder was a man of low origin, but possessing great pride. His eyes and forehead spoke of large intellect, and Waldemar Daa was fond of listening to him, and so was Waldemar's daughter Ida, the eldest, now about 15 years old. And while he was building the ship for the father, he was building for himself a castle in the air, in which he and Ida were to live when they were married. This might have happened, indeed, if there had been a real castle, with stone walls, ramparts, and a moat. But in spite of his clever head, the builder was still but a poor, inferior bird. And how can a sparrow expect to be admitted into the society of peacocks? I passed on in my course, said the wind, and he passed away also. He was not allowed to remain, and little Ida got over it because she was obliged to do so. Proud black horses worth looking at were neighing in the stable, and they were locked up, for the admiral, who had been sent by the king to inspect the new ship and make arrangements for its purchase, was loud in admiration of these beautiful horses. "I heard it all," said the wind, "for I accompanied the gentleman through the open door of the stable and strewed stalks of straw like bars of gold at their feet. Waldemar Dar wanted gold, and the admiral wished for the proud black horses. Therefore he praised them so much. But the hint was not taken, and consequently the ship was not bought. It remained on the shore covered with boards, a Noah's Ark that never got to the water. And that was a pity." In the winter, when the fields were covered with snow, and the water filled with large blocks of ice which I had blown up to the coast, continued the wind, great flocks of crows and ravens, dark and black as they usually are, came and alighted on the lonely, deserted ship. Then they croaked in harsh accents of the forest that now existed no more, of the many pretty birds' nests destroyed, and the little ones left without a home, and all for the sake of that great bit of lumber, that proud ship that never sailed forth. I made the snowflakes whirl till the snow lay like a great lake round the ship, and drifted over it. I let it hear my voice, that it might know what the storm has to say. Certainly I did my part towards teaching it seamanship. That winter passed away, and another winter and summer both passed, as they are still passing away, even as I pass away. The snow drifts onwards, the apple blossoms are scattered, the leaves fall. Everything passes away, and men are passing away too. But the great man's daughters are still young, and little Ida is a rose as fair to look upon as on the day when the shipbuilder first saw her. I often tumbled her long brown hair while she stood in the garden by the apple tree, musing and not heeding how I strewed the blossoms on her hair and dishevelled it. Or sometimes, while she stood gazing at the red sun and the golden sky through the opening branches of the dark, thick foliage of the garden trees. Her sister Joanna was bright and slender as a lily. She had a tall and lofty carriage, and figure, though, like her mother, rather stiff in back. She was very fond of walking through the great hall where hung the portraits of her ancestors. The women were represented in dresses of velvet and silk, with tiny little hats embroidered with pearls on their braided hair. They were all handsome women. The gentlemen appeared clad in steel or in rich cloaks lined with squirrel's fur. They wore little ruffs and swords at their sides. Where would Joanna's place be on that wall some day? And how would he look, her noble lord and husband? This is what she thought of, and often spoke of in a low voice to herself. I heard it as I swept into the long hall, and turned round to come out again. Anna Dorothea, the pale hyacinth, a child of 14, was quiet and thoughtful. Her large, deep blue eyes had a dreamy look, but a childlike smile still played round her mouth. I was not able to blow it away, neither did I wish to do so. We have met in the garden, in the hollow lane, in the field and meadow, where she gathered herbs and flowers which she knew would be useful to her father in preparing the drugs and mixtures he was always concocting. Waldemar Dar was arrogant and proud, but he was also a learned man and knew a great deal. It was no secret, and many opinions were expressed on what he did. In his fireplace there was a fire, even in summertime. He would lock himself in his room, and for days the fire would be kept burning. But he did not talk much of what he was doing. The secret powers of nature are generally discovered in solitude, and did he not soon expect to find out the art of making the greatest of all good things, the art of making gold, so he fondly hoped. Therefore the chimney smoked and the fire crackled so constantly. Yes, I was there too, said the wind. Leave it alone, I sang down the chimney. Leave it alone. It will all end in smoke, air, coals and ashes, and you will burn your fingers. But Waldemar Daa did not leave it alone, and all he possessed vanished like smoke blown by me. The splendid black horses, where are they? What became of the cows in the field, the old gold and silver vessels in cupboards and chests, and even the house and home itself? It was easy to melt all these away in the gold-making crucible, and yet obtain no gold. And so it was. Empty are the barns and storerooms, the cellars and cupboards. The servants decreased in number, and the mice multiplied. First one window became broken, and then another, so that I could get in at other places besides the door. Where the chimney smokes, the meal is being cooked, says the proverb. But here a chimney smoked that devoured all the meals for the sake of gold. I blew round the courtyard, said the wind, like a watchman blowing his home, but no watchman was there. I twirled the weathercock round on the summit of the tower, and it creaked like the snoring of a warder, but no warder was there, nothing but mice and rats. Poverty laid the tablecloth. Poverty sat in the wardrobe and in the larder. The door fell off its hinges, cracks and fissures made their appearance everywhere, so that I could go in and out at pleasure, and that is how I know all about it. Amid smoke and ashes, sorrow and sleepless nights, the hair and beard of the master of the house turned grey, and deep furrows showed themselves around his temples. His skin turned pale and yellow, while his eyes still looked eagerly for gold, the longed-for gold, and the result of his labour was debt instead of gain. I blew the smoke and ashes into his face and beard. I moaned through the broken window panes and the yawning clefts in the walls. I blew into the chests and drawers belonging to his daughters, wherein lay the clothes that had become faded and threadbare from being worn over and over again. Such a song had not been sung at the children's cradle as I sung now. The lordly life had changed to a life of penury. I was the only one who rejoiced aloud in that castle, said the wind. At last I snowed them up, and they say snow keeps people warm. It was good for them, for they had no wood, and the forest, from which they might have obtained it, had been cut down. The frost was very bitter, and I rushed through loopholes and passages, over gables and roofs with keen and cutting swiftness. The 3 high-born daughters were lying in bed because of the cold, and their father crouching beneath his leather coverlet. Nothing to eat, nothing to burn, no fire on the hearth. Here was a life for high-born people. Give it up, give it up. But my Lord Daa would not do that. After winter, spring will come, he said. After want, good times. We must not lose patience. We must learn to wait. Now my horses and lands are all mortgaged. It is indeed high time. But gold will come at last, at Easter. I heard him as he thus spoke. He was looking at a spider's web, and he continued, Thou cunning little weaver, thou dost teach me perseverance. Let anyone tear thy web, and thou wilt begin again and repair it. Let it be entirely destroyed. Thou wilt resolutely begin to make another till it is completed. So ought we to do, if we wish to succeed at last. It was the morning of Easter Day. The bells sounded from the neighbouring church, and the sun seemed to rejoice in the sky. The master of the castle had watched through the night, in feverish excitement, and had been melting and cooling, distilling and mixing. I heard him sighing like a soul in despair. I heard him praying, and I noticed how he held his breath. The lamp burnt out, but he did not observe it. I blew up the fire in the coals on the hearth, and it threw a red glow on his ghastly white face, lighting it up with a glare, while his sunken eyes looked out wildly from their cavernous depths and appeared to grow larger and more prominent, as if they would burst from their sockets. "Look at the alchemic glass," he cried. "Something glows in the crucible, pure and heavy." He lifted it with a trembling hand and exclaimed in a voice of agitation, "Gold! Gold!" He was quite giddy. "I could have blown him down," said the wind. But I only fanned the glowing coals and accompanied him through the door to the room where his daughter sat shivering. His coat was powdered with ashes, and there were ashes in his beard and in his tangled hair. He stood erect and held high in the air the brittle glass that contained his costly treasure. "Found! Found! Gold! Gold!" he shouted, again holding the glass aloft that it might flash in the sunshine. But his hand trembled, and the alchemic glass fell from it, clattering to the ground and break in 1,000 pieces. The last bubble of his happiness had burst with a whiz and a whir, and I rushed away from the gold maker's house. Late in the autumn, when the days were short and the mist sprinkled cold drops on the berries and the leafless branches, I came back in fresh spirits, rushed through the air, swept the sky clear, and snapped off the dry twigs, which is certainly no great labor to do, yet it must be done. There was another kind of sweeping taking place at Waldemar Dars, in the castle of Borreby. His enemy, Owe Ramel of Basnas, was there, with the mortgage of the house and everything it contained in his pocket. I rattled the broken windows, beat against the old rotten doors, and whistled through cracks and crevices, so that Mr. Owe Ramel did not much like to remain there. Ida and Anna Dorothea wept bitterly. Joanna stood, pale and proud, biting her lips till the blood came. But what could that avail? Owe Ramel offered Waldemar Dar permission to remain in the house till the end of his life. No one thanked him for the offer, and I saw the ruined old gentleman lift his head and throw it back more proudly than ever. Then I rushed against the house and the old lime trees with such force that one of the thickest branches, a decayed one, was broken off, and the branch fell at the entrance and remained there. It might have been used as a broom if anyone had wanted to sweep the place out, and a grand sweeping out there really was. I thought it would be so. It was hard for anyone to preserve composure on such a day, but these people had strong wills as unbending as their hard fortune. There was nothing they could call their own, excepting the clothes they wore. Yes, there was one thing more, an alchemist's glass, a new one, which had been lately bought, and filled with what could be gathered from the ground of the treasure which had promised so much, but failed in keeping its promise. Waldemar Dar hid the glass in his bosom, and taking his stick in his hand, the once rich gentleman passed with his daughters out of the house of Borreby. I blew coldly upon his flustered cheeks. I stroked his grey beard and his long white hair, and I sang as well as I was able. Whir, whir, gone away, gone away. Ida walked on one side of the old man, and Anna Dorothea on the other. Joanna turned round as they left the entrance. Why? Fortune would not turn because she turned. She looked at the stone in the walls which had once formed part of the castle of Mark Stieg, and perhaps she thought of his daughters and of the old song. The eldest and youngest, hand in hand, went forth alone to a distant land. These were only two. Here there were three, and their father with them also. They walked along the high road, where once they had driven in their splendid carriage. They went forth with their father as beggars. They wandered across an open field to a mud hut, which they rented for $1.50 a year, a new home with bare walls and empty cupboards. Crows and magpies fluttered about them and cried, as if in contempt, "Caw, caw, turned out of our nest, caw, caw," as they had done in the wood at Borreby when the trees were felled. Dar and his daughters could not help hearing it, so I blew about their ears to drown the noise. What use was it that they should listen? So they went to live in the mud hut in the open field, and I wandered away over moor and meadow, through bare bushes and leafless forests, to the open sea, to the broad shores in other lands. Whirr, whirr, away, away, year after year. And what became of Waldemar Dar and his daughters? Listen, the wind will tell us. The last I saw of them was the pale hyacinth, Anna Dorothea. She was old and bent then, for 50 years had passed, and she had outlived them all. She could relate the history. Yonder, on the heath, near the town of Wyborg, in Jutland, stood the fine new house of the canon. It was built of red brick, with projecting gables. It was inhabited, for the smoke curled up thickly from the chimneys. The canon's gentle lady and her beautiful daughters sat in the bay window and looked over the hawthorn hedge of the garden towards the brown heath. What were they looking at? Their glances fell upon a stork's nest, which was built upon an old tumble-down hut. The roof, as far as one existed at all, was covered with moss and lichen. The stork's nest covered the greater part of it, and that alone was in a good condition, for it was kept in order by the stork himself. "That is a house to be looked at, and not to be touched," said the wind. For the sake of the stork's nest, it had been allowed to remain, although it is a blot on the landscape. They did not like to drive the stork away. Therefore the old shed was left standing, and the poor woman who dwelt in it allowed to stay. She had the Egyptian bird to thank for that. Or was it perchance her reward for having once interceded for the preservation of the nest of its black brother in the forest of Borreby? At that time she, the poor woman, was a young child, a white hyacinth in a rich garden. She remembered that time well, for it was Anna Dorothea. "Oh, oh," she sighed, for people can sigh like the moaning of the wind among the reeds and rushes. "Oh, oh," she would say, "no bells sounded at thy burial, Waldemar Dar." The poor schoolboys did not even sing a psalm when the former lord of Borreby was laid in the earth to rest. Oh, everything has an end, even misery. Sister Ida became the wife of a peasant. That was the hardest trial which befell our father, that the husband of his own daughter should be a miserable serf, whom his owner could place for punishment on the wooden horse. I suppose he is under the ground now. And Ida, alas, alas, it is not ended yet. Miserable that I am. Kind heaven, grant me that I may die. That was Anna Dorothea's prayer in the wretched hut that was left standing for the sake of the stork. "I took pity on the proudest of the sisters," said the wind. "Her courage was like that of a man, and in man's clothes she served as a sailor on board ship. She was of few words and of a dark countenance, but she did not know how to climb, so I blew her overboard before anyone found out that she was a woman. And in my opinion, that was well done," said the wind. On such another Easter morning as that, on which Waldemar Daa imagined he had discovered the art of making gold, I heard the tones of a psalm under the stork's nest and within the crumbling walls. It was Anna Dorothea's last song. There was no window in the hut, only a hole in the wall, and the sun rose like a globe of burnished gold and looked through. With what splendor he filled that dismal dwelling. Her eyes were glazing and her heart breaking, but so it would have been, even had the sun not shone that morning on Anna Dorothea. The stork's nest had secured her a home till her death. I sung over her grave. I sung at her father's grave. I know where it lies, and where her grave is too, but nobody else knows it. New times now. All is changed. The old high road is lost amid cultivated fields. The new one now winds along over covered graves. And soon the railway will come, with its train of carriages, and rush over graves where lie those whose very names are forgotten. All passed away, passed away. This is the story of Waldemar Daa and his daughters. Tell it better, any of you, if you know how, said the wind. And he rushed away and was gone. The story of the year. It was near the end of January, and a terrible fall of snow was pelting down and whirling through the streets and lanes. The windows were plastered with snow on the outside. Snow fell in masses from the roofs. Everyone seemed in a great hurry. They ran, they flew, fell into each other's arms, holding fast for a moment as long as they could stand safely. Coaches and horses looked as if they had been frosted with sugar. The footmen stood with their backs against the carriages so as to turn their faces from the wind. The foot passengers kept within the shelter of the carriages, which could only move slowly on in the deep snow. At last the storm abated, and a narrow path was swept clean in front of the houses. When two persons met in this path, they stood still, for neither liked to take the first step on one side into the deep snow to let the other pass him. There they stood silent and motionless, till at last, as if by tacit consent, they each sacrificed a leg and buried it in the deep snow. Towards evening, the weather became calm. The sky, cleared from the snow, looked more lofty and transparent, while the stars shone with new brightness and purity. The frozen snow crackled underfoot and was quite firm enough to bear the sparrows who hopped upon it in the morning dawn. They searched for food in the path which had been swept, but there was very little for them, and they were terribly cold. "Tweet, tweet," said one to another. "They call this a new year, but I think it is worse than the last. We might just as well have kept the old year. I'm quite unhappy, and I have a right to be so." "Yes, you have. And yet the people ran about and fired off guns to usher in the new year," said a little shivering sparrow. "They threw things against the doors and were quite beside themselves with joy because the old year had disappeared. I was glad too, for I expected we should have some warm days, but my hopes have come to nothing. It freezes harder than ever. I think mankind have made a mistake in reckoning time." "That they have," said a third, an old sparrow with a white poll. "They have something they call a calendar. It's an invention of their own, and everything must be arranged according to it, but it won't do. When spring comes, then the year begins. It is the voice of nature, and I reckon by that. But when will spring come? Asked the others. It will come when the stork returns, but he is very uncertain, and here in the town no one knows anything about it. In the country they have more knowledge. Shall we fly away there and wait? We shall be nearer to spring then, certainly. That may be all very well, said another sparrow, who had been hopping about for a long time, chirping, but not saying anything of consequence. But I have found a few comforts here in town which, I'm afraid, I should miss out in the country. Here in this neighborhood, there lives a family of people who have been so sensible as to place 3 or 4 flower pots against the wall in the courtyard, so that the openings are all turned inward, and the bottom of each points outward. In the latter, a hole has been cut large enough for me to fly in and out. I and my husband have built a nest in one of these pots, and all our young ones, who have now flown away, were brought up there. The people who lived there, of course, made the whole arrangement that they might have the pleasure of seeing us, or they would not have done it. It pleased them also to strew breadcrumbs for us, and so we have food and may consider ourselves provided for. So I think my husband and I will stay where we are, although we are not very happy, but we shall stay. And we will fly into the country, said the others, to see if spring is coming. And away they flew. In the country, it was really winter, a few degrees colder than in the town. The sharp winds blew over the snow-covered fields. The farmer, wrapped in warm clothing, sat in his sleigh and beat his arms across his chest to keep off the cold. The whip lay on his lap. The horses ran till they smoked. The snow crackled. The sparrows hopped about in the wheel ruts and shivered, crying, "Tweet, tweet, when will spring come? It is very long in coming." Very long indeed, sounded over the field, from the nearest snow-covered hill. It might have been the echo which people heard, or perhaps the words of that wonderful old man who sat high on a heap of snow, regardless of wind or weather. He was all in white. He had on a peasant's coarse white coat of frieze. He had long white hair, a pale face, and large, clear blue eyes. "Who is that old man?" asked the sparrows. "I know who he is," said an old raven, who sat on the fence, and was condescending enough to acknowledge that we are all equal in the sight of heaven, even as little birds, and therefore he talked with the sparrows and gave them the information they wanted. "I know who the old man is," he said. "It is Winter, the old man of last year. He is not dead yet, as the calendar says, but acts as guardian to little Prince Spring, who is coming. Winter rules here still. Ugh, the cold makes you shiver, little ones, does it not?" "There, did I not tell you so?" said the smallest of the sparrows. "The calendar is only an invention of man, and is not arranged according to nature. They should leave these things to us. We are created so much more clever than they are." 1 week passed, and then another. The forest looked dark. The hard frozen lake lay like a sheet of lead. The mountains had disappeared, for over the land hung damp, icy mists. Large black crows flew about in silence. It was as if nature slept. At length, a sunbeam glided over the lake, and it shone like burnished silver. But the snow on the fields and the hills did not glitter as before. The white form of Winter sat there still, with his unwandering gaze fixed on the south. He did not perceive that the snowy carpet seemed to sink, as it were, into the earth, that here and there a little green patch of grass appeared, and that these patches were covered with sparrows. Tee-wit, tee-wit, is spring coming at last? Spring, how the cry resounded over field and meadow, and through the dark brown woods, where the fresh green moss still gleamed on the trunks of the trees, and from the south came the two fir stalks flying through the air, and on the back of each sat a lovely little child, a boy and a girl. They greeted the earth with a kiss, and wherever they placed their feet, white flowers sprung up from beneath the snow. Hand in hand, they approached the old iceman, Winter, embraced him, and clung to his breast. And as they did so, in a moment all three were enveloped in a thick damp mist, dark and heavy, that closed over them like a veil. The wind arose with mighty rustling tone, and cleared away the mist. Then the sun shone out warmly. Winter had vanished away, and the beautiful children of spring sat on the throne of the year. "This is really a new year," cried all the sparrows. "Now we shall get our rights and have some return for what we suffered in winter." Wherever the two children wandered, green buds burst forth on bush and tree. The grass grew higher, and the cornfields became lovely in delicate green. The little maiden strewed flowers in her path. She held her apron before her. It was full of flowers. It was as if they sprung into life there, for the more she scattered around her, the more flowers did her apron contain. Eagerly she showered snowy blossoms over apple and peach trees, so that they stood in full beauty before even their green leaves had burst from the bud. Then the boy and the girl clapped their hands, and troops of birds came flying by, no one knew from whence, and they all twittered and chirped, singing, "Spring has come." How beautiful everything was. Many an old dame came forth from her door into the sunshine, and shuffled about with great delight, glancing at the golden flowers which glittered everywhere in the fields, as they used to do in her young days. The world grew young again to her as she said, "It is a blessed time out here today." The forest already wore its dress of dark green buds. The thyme blossomed in fresh fragrance. Primroses and anemones sprung forth, and violets bloomed in the shade, while every blade of grass was full of strength and sap. Who could resist sitting down on such a beautiful carpet? And then the young children of spring seated themselves, holding each other's hands, and sang, and laughed, and grew. A gentle rain fell upon them from the sky, but they did not notice it, for the raindrops were their own tears of joy. They kissed each other and were betrothed, and in the same moment the buds of the trees unfolded, and when the sun rose, the forest was green. Hand in hand, the two wandered beneath the fresh pendant canopy of foliage, while the sun's rays gleamed through the opening of the shade in changing and varied colours. The delicate young leaves filled the air with refreshing odour. Merrily rippled the clear brooks and rivulets between the green velvety rushes, and over the many-coloured pebbles beneath. All nature spoke of abundance and plenty. The cuckoo sang, and the lark carolled, for it was now beautiful spring. The careful willows had, however, covered their blossoms with woolly gloves, and this carefulness is rather tedious. Days and weeks went by, and the heat increased. Warm air waved the corn as it grew golden in the sun. The white northern lily spread its large green leaves over the glossy mirror of the woodland lake, and the fishes sought the shadows beneath them. In a sheltered part of the wood, the sun shone upon the walls of a farmhouse, brightening the blooming roses and ripening the black juicy berries which hung on the loaded cherry trees with his hot beams. Here sat the lovely wife of summer, the same whom we have seen as a child and a bride. Her eyes were fixed on dark gathering clouds, which in wavy outlines of black and indigo were piling themselves up like mountains, higher and higher. They came from every side, always increasing like a rising rolling sea. Then they swooped towards the forest, where every sound had been silenced as if by magic, every breath hushed, every bird mute. All nature stood still in grave suspense, but in the lanes and the highways, passengers on foot or in carriages were hurrying to find a place of shelter. Then came a flash of light, as if the sun had rushed forth from the sky, flaming, burning, all-devouring, and darkness returned amid a rolling crash of thunder. The rain poured down in streams. Now there was darkness, then blinding light, now thrilling silence, then deafening din. The young brown reeds on the moor waved to and fro in feathery billows. The forest boughs were hidden in a watery mist, and still light and darkness followed each other. Still came the silence after the roar, while the corn and the blades of grass lay beaten down and swamped, so that it seemed impossible they could ever raise themselves again. But after a while, the rain began to fall gently. The sun's rays pierced the clouds, and the water drops glittered like pearls on leaf and stem. The birds sang, the fishes leapt up to the surface of the water, the gnats danced in the sunshine, and yonder, on a rock by the heaving salt sea, sat Summer himself, a strong man with sturdy limbs and long, dripping hair. Strengthened by the cool bath, he sat in the warm sunshine, while all around him renewed nature bloomed strong, luxuriant and beautiful. It was summer, warm, lovely summer. Sweet and pleasant was the fragrance wafted from the clover field, where the bees swarmed round the ruined tower. The bramble twined itself over the old altar, which, washed by the rain, glittered in the sunshine. And thither flew the queen bee with her swarm, and prepared wax and honey. But Summer and his bosom wife saw it with different eyes. To them the altar table was covered with the offerings of nature. The evening sky shone like gold. No church dome could ever gleam so brightly, and between the golden evening and the blushing morning there was moonlight. It was indeed summer. And days and weeks passed. The bright scythes of the reapers glittered in the cornfields. The branches of the apple trees bent low, heavy with the red and golden fruit. The hop, hanging in clusters, filled the air with sweet fragrance, and beneath the hazel bushes, where the nuts hung in great bunches, rested a man and a woman, Summer and his grave consort. "See," she exclaimed, "what wealth, what blessings surround us. Everything is homelike and good, and yet, I know not why, I long for rest and peace. I can scarcely express what I feel. They are already ploughing the fields again. More and more the people wish for gain. See, the stalks are flocking together, and following the plough at a short distance. They are the birds from Egypt who carried us through the air. Do you remember how we came as children to this land of the north? We brought with us flowers and bright sunshine, and green to the forests, but the wind has been rough with them, and they are now become dark and brown, like the trees of the south. But they do not, like them, bear golden fruit." "Do you wish to see golden fruit?" said the man. "Then rejoice." and he lifted his arm. The leaves of the forest put on colours of red and gold, and bright tints covered the woodlands. The rose bushes gleamed with scarlet hips, and the branches of the elder trees hung down with the weight of the full, dark berries. The wild chestnuts fell ripe from their dark green shells, and in the forests the violets bloomed for the second time. But the queen of the year became more and more silent and pale. "It blows cold," she said, "and night brings the damp mist. I long for the land of my childhood." Then she saw the storks fly away every one, and she stretched out her hands towards them. She looked at the empty nests. In one of them grew a long-stalked cornflower, in another the yellow mustard seed, as if the nest had been placed there only for its comfort and protection, and the sparrows were flying round them all. "Tweet, where has the master of the nest gone?" cried one. "I suppose he could not bear it when the wind blew, and therefore he has left this country. I wish him a pleasant journey." The forest leaves became more and more yellow. Leaf after leaf fell, and the stormy winds of autumn howled. The year was now far advanced, and upon the fallen yellow leaves lay the queen of the year, looking up with mild eyes at a gleaming star, and her husband stood by her. A gust of wind swept through the foliage, and the leaves fell in a shower. The summer queen was gone, but a butterfly, the last of the year, flew through the cold air. Damp fogs came, icy winds blew, and the long, dark nights of winter approached. The ruler of the year appeared with hair white as snow, but he knew it not. He thought snowflakes falling from the sky covered his head, as they decked the green fields with a thin, white covering of snow. And then the church bells rang out for Christmas time. "The bells are ringing for the newborn year," said the ruler. "Soon will a new ruler and his bride be born, and I shall go to rest with my wife in yonder light-giving star." In the fresh, green fir wood, where the snow lay all around, stood the angel of Christmas and consecrated the young trees that were to adorn his feast. "May there be joy in the rooms and under the green boughs," said the old ruler of the year. In a few weeks, he had become a very old man, with hair as white as snow. "My resting time draws near. The young pair of the year will soon claim my crown and scepter." "But the night is still thine," said the angel of Christmas, "for power, but not for rest. Let the snow lie warmly upon the tender seed. Learn to endure the thought that another is worshipped, whilst thou art still Lord. Learn to endure being forgotten while yet thou livest. The hour of thy freedom will come when spring appears." "And when will spring come?" asked Winter. "It will come when the stork returns." And with white locks and snowy beard, cold, bent and hoary, but strong as the wintry storm and firm as the ice, old Winter sat on the snowdrift-covered hill, looking towards the south, where Winter had sat before, and gazed. The ice glittered, the snow crackled, the skaters skimmed over the polished surface of the lakes. Ravens and crows formed a pleasing contrast to the white ground, and not a breath of wind stirred, and in the still air old Winter clenched his fists, and the ice lay fathoms deep between the lands. Then came the sparrows again out of the town, and asked, "Who is that old man?" The ravens sat there still, or it might be his son, which is the same thing, and he said to them, "It is Winter, the old man of the former year. He is not dead, as the calendar says, but he is guardian to the spring, which is coming. When will spring come? Asked the sparrows. For we shall have better times then, and a better rule. The old times are worth nothing. And in quiet thought, old winter looked at the leafless forest, where the graceful form and bends of each tree and branch could be seen. And while winter slept, icy mist came from the clouds, and the ruler dreamt of his youthful days and of his manhood. And in the morning dawn the whole forest glittered with hoar-frost, which the sun shook from the branches. And this was the summer dream of winter. When will spring come? Asked the sparrows. Spring. Again the echo sounded from the hills on which the snow lay. The sunshine became warmer, the snow melted, and the birds twittered, "Spring is coming." And high in the air flew the first stork, and the second followed. A lovely child sat on the back of each, and they sank down on the open field, kissed the earth, and kissed the quiet old man. And as the mist from the mountain top, he vanished away and disappeared, and the story of the year was finished. "This is all very fine, no doubt," said the sparrows, "and it is very beautiful, but it is not according to the calendar, therefore it must be all wrong." Hello there, my old friend. Tonight, our quest takes us through a collection of old fairy tales written down by Hans Christian Andersen. Now, settle in, take a deep breath, and let's travel back to an age of myth and legend.